Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined today by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Famiko-Cahill. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Good to be back with you guys.
Yeah, that's right. You took a reprieve for a week. Hopefully you had a great holiday, and Happy New Year to you, since it's the first time I've spoken with you since then.
Happy New Year, yeah.
It's going to be a little grim today around our call, unfortunately, because we are speaking together on the day when there's some interesting and extraordinary, we'll call it extraordinary activity going on in our nation's capital. So with that in mind, we'll do our best to stay focused.
And I'll jump in and just apologize there to say that I am kind of monitoring the situation with our local representative, North Coast Congressman Jared Huffman, being on lockdown in the Capitol building in D.C. with violent protesters having stormed the building. So I might be a little bit distracted monitoring my phone and waiting word back from him to see that he is safe and if he might have a few minutes to talk with us. So
I think an armed siege is a good excuse to look at your phone in a meeting.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you
this. I'm going to take a pass. Yeah.
Yeah.
As these things go, that's high on the list, I'm sure. Unprecedented, actually, in my experience. Probably everybody's experience in our country anyway. Mm-hmm. So let's try to take a look at what you're covering right now this week, Thad, when it comes to updates on COVID in our community.
Yeah, so there's been a lot going on. The story that we have in this week's paper, which is actually still developing, there's new tidbits that was released by the state last night after it went to press, but is looking at Humboldt County's red status and kind of how precarious that is, and the health officer's warning that he expects we'll be back in the purple tier, the state's purple risk tier, with all the restrictions that come with that next Tuesday. But a big part of the story just tries to kind of dig into the data and answer this seemingly perplexing question about why we are currently in the red status or in the red tier when all of our data points really indicate that our situation is worse than it was when we were previously in the purple tier, and that we should qualify for the state's purple status.
So without spoiling the headline here. It seems like we are, based on the content of your story, that the test positivity rate and the number of positive cases per 100,000, those are the metrics they typically follow. Mm-hmm. But there is this adjustment factor that they include, and that seems to be what worked out to our, I guess, advantage in this case to get the lower rating. But our public health officer has a different opinion about that. And so can you tell us a little bit about sort of the outlook from the perspective of public health?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The state has these two criterias that are the primary drivers in determining what risk tier a county is put in. But then there's this third kind of somewhat nebulous component that they look at, which is a equity assessment, a health equity assessment. And so essentially what the state did is it broke down all counties by census tracts, and determining what are the most at risk. And so at risk due to a number of socioeconomic factors, including access to healthcare and income and things like that. And what the state wanted to ensure was that counties weren't leaving those most at risk behind, those most socioeconomically challenged portions of their county behind. And so the state wanted to make sure that the test positivity rate was not higher in those areas, and would give counties a little bit more leeway and an adjustment, as they term it, for counties who are doing well by making sure that their most at-risk folks are being tested at least a commensurate rate with the rest of the population. And so Humboldt County has done really well on that factor, and actually our test positivity rate for those lower socioeconomic census tracts is well below that for the rest of the county. Now, the state has never really articulated, at least publicly, how they make these adjustments. And from talking, from the public health officers, public comments, and from talking to folks in public health, it doesn't seem like our local officials have a really firm understanding of exactly how those adjustments are made either. And whereas it seemed like initially it was an adjustment that would be made if a county was kind of on the cusp between two tiers, and it was really kind of marginally, it was just barely over with, with one of the two metrics, either test positivity rate or positive cases per capita. Now, Humboldt County isn't really close. Our test positivity rate is kind of in the red area, but our the rate of positive cases is not only in the purple, but is like double the threshold for being in the purple and increasing, week by week at this point. And so when Humboldt County, back a couple weeks ago was moved back into the red tier, it caught local officials off guard. And they didn't understand it. I mean, the health officer basically said it wasn't supported by the data and urged everybody to be cautious. And I have yet to be able to get a really clear answer from state or local officials about how this equity measure works and exactly why Humboldt County remains in the red tier. And Dr. Hoffman told the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday that he believes Humboldt County will be moved back into the purple tier this coming Tuesday, on the 12th of January. But I'm unclear at this point if he's been told that's going to happen by the state, or if he just thinks, looking at the data, it's going to happen, or exactly where we stand and why. And then another interesting wrinkle that happened last night after we went to press is the state issued the statewide order regarding hospital capacity. And so basically it does two things. It requires hospitals in really impacted areas to cancel all elective procedures for the foreseeable future. Wow. And then it also requires hospitals in less impacted areas to accept ICU bed transfers. And so basically allowing, really impacted, overwhelmed hospitals to transfer out some of those patients to areas that are less overwhelmed. At this point, we don't really know what that means for Humboldt County. Last I checked in with the county health office, they were working on kind of sending out a press release to advise folks of what that means locally. Due to kind of our remote area and how difficult and time consuming it takes to get here, it seems unlikely that we're going to have a rash of COVID patients transferred here from the really overwhelmed areas, which are in southern parts of the state. But it does raise this interesting question that, the vast majority of the state is currently on a state mandated stay-at-home order due to hospital capacity in those regions. And if all of a sudden the state is talking about hospital capacity not as a regional thing, but a statewide thing, is the North Coast or the Northern California region gonna fall under that stay-at-home order too? It seems like that's not happening yet. But it would seem like a logical next step if you're treating, statewide hospital capacity as a singular thing where patients are being transferred throughout the state.
That makes sense totally. So thanks on that. And there was another element. I don't know if you want to get too far into it or if there's much information about it currently that's changed in the recent past. But so there's also, you spoke about the vaccination tiers and the state's rollout of the vaccines that have been distributed to the various regions. That there's a particular policy about the priority of administration and the schedule. Can you give us a little update on kind of where we stand on that in our community?
Yeah, so statewide, really, we're still in the first tier. I think they call it Tier 1A, which is really just trying to vaccinate frontline healthcare workers who are at the greatest risk of COVID exposure, and then skilled nursing residents and staff, figuring that those are both the most at risk of exposure and the most risk as far as the skilled nursing facilities of really critical outcomes. And so locally, nominally, we are still... That's still who we're working on trying to get vaccinated. It's a little bit complicated because skilled nursing facilities are going to get their vaccinations through a federal contract between the federal government and CVS Pharmacy and Walgreens. So the county is really kind of out of the loop of how to handle that. What we've been looking at is trying to figure out who, and so the county is distributing vaccines to local healthcare providers. And they are then based on kind of a needs assessment that they surveyed these providers to figure out how many frontline workers they have, how many folks that they would qualify for this first batch, and are distributing them proportionately in that way. It seems like there's some kind of weird things happening in that Not all frontline workers have been vaccinated at hospitals, but Southern Humboldt Community Health announced that it had started vaccinating like volunteer firefighters, who are very much first responders and very much in risk's way, but are definitely not part of what the state has deemed that tier 1A. So all of that, we're trying to keep an eye on, making sure these vaccines are seeing if these vaccines are being distributed as kind of the protocol demands. Then the other wrinkle that we're trying to look at is the health officer Hoffman told the board on Tuesday that while the county had kind of gotten a lot of regular shipments of the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, over the initial couple weeks, those have stopped, and they're unclear kind of when they'll resume. And so that is a point of some concern as well. That they've gotten guarantees that they will receive the second doses for those who have already received the first dose of the vaccine, but they don't know when they'll get another shipment of kind of first doses in. And then I think the other thing that's really important for folks, kind of in the general public to recognize and think about is Humboldt County Sheriff William Hansel told the board on Tuesday that he had been on a board with the California Secretary of Health, and they basically with state sheriffs, and they'd been advised that it's likely going to be 6 to 9 months before somebody in the general public who isn't deemed an essential worker or kind of on the front lines of COVID response, before they'll be able to just sign up to receive a vaccine. And so I think a lot of hope came with the delivery of this vaccine, and rightfully so. The speed at which Pfizer got this thing approved is nothing short of kind of a medical miracle. And there's a lot of fanfare about the first doses arriving in Humboldt County, but I think it's really important for folks to recognize that it's going to be a long time before we get enough of this vaccine to really get to the point where it starts making an impact as far as health restrictions and protocols. I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Anthony Fauci last week, and he said he suspects it'll be, we need 70 to 85% of the population vaccinated before we can start looking at things like restaurants resuming normal operations and large social gatherings and those types of things. So really a lot of hope in this vaccine, but it's also important for us to recognize that it's not the silver bullet that returns life to normal. Because it's here, it doesn't mean we're all safe. We still got a road ahead of us.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's really important because I attended a call, Senator McGuire's town hall, maybe a week or so ago, where he had 4 different public health experts, and they were talking about tier 1A and tier 1B, which are, a lot of those frontline workers you talked about. And I vaguely recall they said like nationwide, there's like 3 million people sort of online for these vaccines that are going to be in the front line. And they were saying, be optimistic that there's some 3 to 6 month window that we'll see the ability for it to go beyond that. But like you described, I think from my perspective, this is today, when I read your article, it was the first I heard from the State Sheriff's Association call that, well, realistically for other, non-frontline, non-essential, regular folks, it's going to be a little bit longer than that. So this was kind of breaking news. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and just to add to that real quickly before we move on. Here we are 3 weeks after kind of the initial doses were delivered to Humboldt County and California, and the state's reporting that, there were 3 million people in line to receive vaccines under that tier 1A, and that the state has still to date only received, 1.3 million vaccines. So we're not even halfway to that first group, and the supply chain has already slowed down to a halt. It's going to be a while.
Well, thanks again. We definitely look forward to hearing from you each week, each time you report back. How about you, Jennifer? What's going on the arts and features beat this week?
Well, this week we have a very small scale focused story from Emily McCollum. She's a new writer for us, and it is about Larrupin sauce.
Right on.
In times of panic, some of you responded to natural disasters, pandemics, etc., by hoarding toilet paper. You know who you are. And if you respond to this attack on our democracy by hoarding toilet paper again, I don't. Anyway, so don't make me come back there. So anyway, while you were out hoarding toilet paper, other people were hoarding Larrupin sauce. Okay. Hoarding, schmorting, kind of hoarding, because Larrupin sauce became less available and there was some panic. There was panic buying. It was a perfect storm of events, as Emily reports. It was panic buying related to comfort food because people were like, we're going to be in lockdown for 6 months, 10 months. I need my Larrupin. And they bought it up. Or also, there was the problem of distribution. So she goes back and kind of looks at the history of the sauce, which was created by Dixie Gorel and Per Inglesberg, the original owners of Larrupin, Larrupin Cafe, which opened in Trinidad in one location in West Haven, I think, at first. And then it moved to its current location, which used to be a bed and breakfast, which it still feels like a bed and breakfast, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, somewhere around 8 to 10 years ago, it sold to Paul Fitzgerald, but the restaurant business sold to Paul Fitzgerald, and Dixie and Pear held on to the ownership. That family held on to the ownership of the sauce. So the restaurant still uses the sauce recipe, but they make their own in-house. Theirs is not a shelf-stable version, which is created by canning. The shelf-stable one that you buy in the stores is actually made in Sonoma, bottled there, and then distributed up here by Tomasos. So that in mind, wildfires, pandemic, every kind of craziness. You remember this year? Remember how it went?
Yeah.
All of those things, while making your life a shambles, also conspired to keep Larrupin sauce away from you. So all those things led to a shortage, and people responded to that shortage by calling up the restaurant. When I called to do some fact checking on the story, and I spoke to someone there, I was like, so you getting a lot of calls about the mustard? And she was like, woman was tired. But then also, the distributors were being called. I'm sure people were looking at their bottles and being like, who do I call?
Right.
Stores were getting calls. People are wandering around looking lost in the aisles. Emily talked to one guy who was like, I have to have it for my Reuben, which, editor's note, raised eyebrow on that Reuben. But you know what? We at the Journal embrace alternative lifestyles, and you do you. We accept you. And maybe you'll meet the right mustard. I don't know. But it was quite a little period of time where people could not get their favorite mustard, and it's a small thing. And I get it. It's not anywhere close to the hardships of food shortage and food insecurity that people have been going through. But there's a real psychological thing that happens, right? When our comforts, everything is out of control, and you think to yourself, but this one little thing, and then sometimes that one little thing is the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? And in fact, somebody put together an internet scam. Those scams where you give your information to do a quiz or to win a prize or whatever. Totally. So the fellow that that manages the bottling plant, somebody said to him, hey, I think it's really cool you guys are doing that giveaway on Facebook. And he's like, we don't have a Facebook page. Oh, no. And it turns out that somebody was using it as a kind of like a phishing scam, so that they could harvest your information if you entered to win some Larrupin, because people were desperate. It was also for sale online from third-party sellers. Somebody must have hoarded a case or whatever, and they were selling it for double the price. They were price gouging on the Larrupin. Price gouging Larrupin. But it's amazing, and it really is. It's indicative of Larrupin's hold on our county, on people's palates. It's what makes things, for a lot of people, it's what makes food taste like home. It's what they grew up on. It's the mustard of their youth. It is actually not the invention of Larrupin. It is a take on a very traditional sauce, a Swedish sauce that I am going to butcher the name of, Hovmastarsus, which I am sorry, Swedes, for how I just said that. I probably said something terrible, but on the bright side, I did learn on a Mac how you make the little A with the circle on top of it. So baby steps. But, it's that mustardy dill sweet sauce for gravlax and other things that shows up on smorgasbords. And Yeah, it's a very traditional Swedish sauce. And somehow that became a Humboldt sauce, just like somehow we ended up being really into steel drums.
Yeah.
A lot of
North Coast
things.
sound.
Yeah, things just take root in Humboldt, and then we just sort of like, it is our own. We just sort of take it on. And so that's the tale of Larrupin. The happy ending of this story is that it is back on shelves. So if you have been like shaking, holding a naked bagel and salmon, waiting for the Larrupin to be back, it is back. You can go get it. I ask you not to hoard. Just buy what you need. Yeah, buy what you need.
I mean, I have heard people that are really into having it with oysters and crab, and so I could see how that would be a traditional thing that just kind of during each season you just think about it. So I'm sure people are thinking about them. It's good to hear it's coming back.
Again, we embrace those alternative lifestyles, but
right.
I don't want to see it. You know what I'm saying?
It's not your flavor.
My kids to see it. Yeah. Speaking of condiments and mustard in particular, I wonder if they have Larrupin. They've probably got a bottle of Larrupin back there. Chicago Dog House. Remember we talked about the Chicago hot dog stand that opened at the COVID testing site?
Right.
Yes, it was a bold move. So they have made the possibly bolder move in a pandemic to open up a brick and mortar location.
Oh,
so
wow.
Instead of going and getting a hot dog after you've had a 6-inch Q-tip jammed up your nose, you can go and get one just in Henderson Center. You may recall that Dio's closed. We talked about that too. Dio's Sandwich Shop, which was the size of a closet. Kind of perfect for a place that just does hot dogs and sandwiches. So you can go there and you can get your dragged through the garden Chicago dog. They don't even judge you if you get ketchup. See, they embrace everyone, all the diversity. And they have those hot roast beef sandwiches and everything. But anyway, it's a really lovely little spot that they've put together, and they are going hard in a pandemic because they are takeout friendly. So as long as restaurants are able to stay open, they're able to stay in business. And it's turning out to be one of those stories about a business that is making it in some of the most difficult circumstances we could imagine.
This is good. There's a ray of hope for us to get some restaurants that actually can thrive, I guess is the right word. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, that's right.
I know we're in the closing minutes here. Thad, do you want to put in a quick plug for the cover story before we wrap up?
Yeah, and the cover story this week comes from Project Censored. It's a story that we run every year, right around the end of the year, the beginning of the year. And it's looking at the top 10 most underreported stories of 2020. So it's kind of taking a national look, but there are a number of stories that really resonate locally that we have actually reported on, which I'm proud to say.
Nice.
But it's a really interesting alternative media look at kind of the year that was and some of the big issues that really went undercovered in mainstream or national media and talking about why and the impacts of these stories. So I really urge folks to check it out.
That's awesome. I think every year that's one of my stocking presents is the Project Censored book from the prior year. So I'm a year behind, but it's great. It's really great.
You'll catch up.
Yeah, exactly.
You got time to read now. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's excellent. And I should say that, yes, the top 10 list is a teaser for this book that comes out every year, which goes into these stories and more and in a lot more depth.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to check that out too, and I'll get caught up on Project Censored. Thank you both. That's going to just about do it for us this week. North Coast Journal, available online, available on newsstands now. Pick one up, stay informed. Everybody keep staying safe, healthy, happy New Year. Jennifer, thank you both so much. We'll see you guys again next week.
See you next week.